Okay, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I recognize most of the faces in this room, but for those of you who I don't know, my name is Kaylee Perez. I'm the Refugee Sponsorship and Settlement Associate here, and I am here today to help introduce Moses Moini, who will be sharing today. He's our Refugee Program Coordinator. He's traveled here today from St. Catharines to share an update with you about our refugee program, share some stories, reflections on the past 2 years, and give you some information on ways that you can get involved with what our program is currently seeing right now. So because we have a short amount of time, I'll pass it over to Moses, and then I'll come back later.
Thank you, Kaylee, and welcome. I'll begin with an introduction to refugees. Ray and May, a young couple in 1990s, lived among the 70 households in rural village in southwest Burma. A rice plantation provided work. Vegetable gardens gave them food in addition to rice. Though life was primitive and there were no schools or medical services, it was still home. Without means of communication, the villagers in Karen had little awareness of the conflict that was raging in their country, designed to destroy numerous minority ethnic groups like theirs in their homeland. In October 1996, soldiers suddenly arrived and began to burn their village. Villagers fled into the jungle with only what they could quickly grab and carry. The villagers who knew nothing about Banmai refugee camp, only 1 or 2 days' journey from their village, kept walking in the jungle, always on the lookout for wild animals, soldiers, or landmines. Mountains provided water, but there was little to eat in the jungle. They struggled with starvation as they feared soldiers would find them if they lit fire. Eventually, camp residents who secretly risked leaving the camp briefly found the wanderers and brought them to the Banmai camp, refugee camp outside the Thai border. Ray and May lived in the camp for 20 years with little hope for the future. 2 sons and 3 daughters who were born to them in the camp gave them great joy. But what kind of a future could their children have in the camp? I want you to keep that question in mind. Our work in migration and resettlement is purposed to assist people like Ray, May, and their children sit under their own fig tree and under their own vine tree, and with no need to be afraid, as commanded by the Lord in Micah 4, chapter 4, verse 4. Refugees. We have heard so much about that in the recent past and in the many years over. Of late, we are hearing about the persecution of the Rohingya Muslims. And yet, another conflict is brewing far away in the continent of Africa, where millions of South Sudanese have already fled their homes, with little at best of international attention. The United Nations High Commission for Refugees puts the number of refugees or people of concern at 65.3 million people. 21.3 million of those are refugees under the age of 18. The total number of 65.3 includes other people of concern who are either in their homelands and others like the Palestinians who are under the United Nations and Works Refugee Agency. Every day, up to 42,000 people are forced from their homes. Refugees become eligible for resettlement when durable solutions cannot be found. But the reality of durable solutions, which include resettlement, is a distant reality for so many, as only 1% of the world refugees ever get resettled. Let me talk briefly about the birth of the private sponsorship of refugee program. In a blog post online about boat people, it read, in early 1979, the Los Angeles Times reported about a freighter languishing off the east coast of Malaysia, carrying 2,500 Vietnamese refugees. The Malaysian Navy refused to allow the freighter to dock, even though it had run out of fuel, food, and water. The boat people, as they were called, were political, economic, and ethnic refugees. It was that state of desperation for the Southeast Asian refugees that led to the creation of the private sponsorship program, and that was when MCC started the negotiation with the government of Canada to allow private groups to be able to respond to the refugee crisis. The private sponsorship of refugee program is a partnership that is administered by Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada and the people of Canada to extend Canada's capacity to resettle refugees from abroad. Mayor Central Committee is a sponsorship agreement holder, and our agreement allows us to approve churches and groups to sponsor refugees. Over a 2-year period since its creation in 1979, Mennonite churches in Canada, through the Central Committee, with the government, had over 4,000 refugees from Southeast Asia. What does the private sponsorship program look like today? When I started working with refugees in 2004, I had read and frequently heard about the response to the Southeast Asian refugees. Those who were actively involved at that time spoke about a completely different program from what the experience was then. But that was prior to September 2015, when getting sponsors on board took a lot longer, leave alone the challenges. September 2015 changed everything with the Kurdi tragedy. Prior to September 2015, MCC mainly worked with its constituent churches. As of today, 100 of the 200 constituent groups that we worked with are non-faith groups. First-time sponsors composed of neighborhood associations, families that have come together, business association, and university institutions, to name just a few. When we looked back at our program as we were putting together the program report for 2016-2017, from April of 2016 to March 2017, nationally, MCC had sponsored 545 families, and that had a total of 1,824 individuals. Half of MCC constituent churches in Canada did sponsorship. The support was broad and across the country. And we in Ontario, what did we do? We worked with 113 sponsoring groups. We received 167 families composed of 637 individuals. Refugee sponsorship. Exciting, challenging, full of hope. Let me continue. with the story of May and Ray. As Ray and May wondered hopelessly as to whether there was a future for their children, something was happening in Canada. I love this story and I want you to stay with me. In 2015, Trinity Lutheran Church in New Hamburg sponsored a Karen refugee from Bamai refugee camp. When Trinity later learned that 4 Wilmont Mennonite churches were considering to sponsor a refugee family, they encouraged them to apply to sponsor Ray and May family, despite the hype in Canada at that time to sponsor Syrian refugees. 2 agrarian families with the same ethnic and cultural background May and Ray and their children were warmly received in their new home in New Hamburg. The children are doing well in school. The parents have attended English as a second language program. The family has been busy with various short-term jobs, soccer, shopping, visiting local attractions, birthday parties, attending worship services, and other community events. The family expressed gratitude for the support they have received and for the relationship that has been developed. In refugee sponsorship, there is a new beginning. Conflicts destroy communities. Through the blended sponsorship program, you can make a difference and help create that new beginning. For May, Ray, and their children, that question that they had asked about what kind of a future their children would have in the camp has been answered by resettlement to Canada. We can all be part of creating that new hope for refugees and for their children in Canada through the blended sponsorship program. And Kaylee is going to talk more about the blended sponsorship program before I take over again.
Okay, do you want to pass these out? All right, so we've been talking about big numbers and the reality that there are 22.5 million refugees in the world today. And the reality is that less than 1% of those refugees will have the opportunity to be resettled to a country like Canada. And that is partly because refugees are forced to flee. Nobody chooses to be a refugee. And so they choose to flee to neighboring countries because the hope is that they will one day be able to return to their home country. And so part of a comprehensive global approach to responding to this world refugee crisis is looking at durable solutions where refugees are, looking at integration opportunities so that they can stay where they are as long as possible so that they can return home eventually. But these less than 1% that have the opportunity to resettle, they have that opportunity because of vulnerabilities that they demonstrate that they have. So single parent families, victims of trauma and torture, significantly large families with many children. And so the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees and the Canadian government, through this blended program, have partnered together to identify these vulnerable refugees who are being able to resettle to a country like Canada. So what you're seeing in front of you there is a handout that the UNHCR has created. And as you can see, they have identified that 1.2 million refugees are in need of resettlement in 2017 alone. And Canada is willing to accept up to 3,000. So we today are seeing something very different than we were 2 years ago in 2015. Over the past 2 years, we had a flood of groups signing up and saying, we want to do this, we want to support a refugee family, which was incredible. And we have now returned to, we're settling into a new norm, and seeing that we are now having more refugees in need of sponsorship than we have groups available. So this blended program is unique. It started in 2013, and it's a partnership between the Government of Canada and private sponsors. So the government provides approximately 40% of the total funds needed to support a family for 1 year, and then private sponsors commit to providing 60% of the remaining funds and full settlement support for oftentimes it's 1 year. The families, as I mentioned, are identified by the Canadian government and the United Nations, which means that they go through all of the screening, medical and security screenings prior to being identified on a matching list that we at MCC have access to as a sponsorship agreement holder. So once groups get ready and they say we are ready to welcome a family, we look at what we currently have available, and just to update you on kind of the cases and the families that we're seeing available for sponsorship right now. The countries of origin that we are seeing include Syria, Iraq, Iran, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Congo, Burundi, Somalia, Burma, Colombia, and China. Over the past few months, profiles referred to us have included singles, so mainly males, but also some single females, and those are some of the most difficult cases to match. Various Congolese families, and the family sizes have varied from families of 3 to families of 6 or more. And a family category that we also work through is this JAZZ program, which are significantly high needs families. The government provides the financial support for 2 years, and then groups are matched to them to provide that additional settlement support. And so we're seeing some JAZZ cases as well, and if you have more questions about that, let me know. But that is the need we are seeing. So we have families in need of sponsorship. The countries of referral are no longer just Syria. It's been balanced now to be reflective of this global refugee resettlement program, and we are in need of sponsors too. So if you know of someone or are connected to a church or a community group, MCC is willing to come alongside and work to support you in doing that. And we at MCC truly see resettlement as so much more than simply resettling a family from crisis to community. We see this as a long-term peace-building initiative that exists here in Canada. And I had the opportunity to visit one of our groups in a very remote area of Ontario, and they shared with me this story. You may have read it in our In Touch update, but if you haven't, I'll share it. They are a group that is in a very rural location, and they were preparing to resettle a family from the Congo, and they had set up a house. They were getting the furniture moved in, and the neighbor of the house came out and was asking the sponsors, what are you guys up to? And so they shared, oh, we're preparing this home. You're going to have some new neighbors shortly. It's a family from the Congo. And the neighbor became very upset and angry and said, I'm frustrated that you haven't consulted me. I cannot believe that you are resettling this Black family into my neighborhood. You significantly devalue the property, and I'm not okay with it. So the sponsor, not really knowing how to respond, just said, okay, see you later. Told the rest of their sponsorship group and said, hey, the neighbor of the family's home is not so welcoming. Let's kind of keep an eye out for that. So the family arrived, and as all newcomers are, was very welcoming, said hello every morning, would bring them food whenever they had extra food. And within a month, this neighbor went back to that same sponsor that he had spoken to and said, I owe you an apology. I am so sorry for what I initially communicated